Hello everyone. In the last video we have seen how ReactJS works internally, and we have created a simple hello world ReactJS application. In this video we will gonna learn about the concept of rendering in ReactJS, as well as we'll see about the component and props in the ReactJS. So let's get started. So if we look into the documentation of rendering elements, we can go reactjs.com/doc rendering elements, or we can use the navigation bar on the right side, right? So if you go to main concept and rendering elements, you will see that. So seeing this, right, we know already in the previous videos, right, we can create HTML element using something like this, which uses the JSX kinds of syntax, and then we can render it using our React DOM using render, right? So let's go to our code and see how we have done it. So if you remember, this was our code last time, so we can remove the unnecessary code, right, which we had previously. And then we can also
it's 11 o'clock.
Remove these, and we can write our hello world kinds of something like this. Just copy, now if we look into the web page, right, and reload, it says hello world. Okay, I hope you understand the syntax. In the previous video we already explained how the React render works in the and change in the root element. Okay, so how this get updated in the React DOM, right? This is a good question if you understand. So we can do that, right? Here is a simple component we created. We can create something like this. What it does we can explain on the next after we done the example, right? So we can just copy this line of code, and then we can paste this. So if we see this is changing the value, right, on the time. So let's read the code how it works. Okay, so we have a component called tick. Let's call it as a function, since we yet don't know what is component, right? And what it does is, like, it create a element which is a JSX syntax, if you remember. Then we have a div, and why we have a div here on top, if you remember in the last video we highlighted that we should always return a single node, which means if we have something like this, React will gonna complain that, hey, cannot have a two parent element, always have a single parents. So we have a hello world, and then we have the time of current timestamp, right? And then we render this, and set interval is JavaScript function, we know, right? Asynchronous function which render the tick every 1000 millisecond. Okay, now if we go to the how it is updated, right? If we go to the inspect element, you'll see that it only updated where it is necessary, which means it only update the date itself. It doesn't change here itself or this div, right? We can check on our browser also, right? If you see, it is only changing the date, nothing else is changing. So that's the best thing about React. It only update when it is necessary. It doesn't manipulate the whole DOM element. So that's why we have the concept of virtual DOM, where virtual DOM is nothing but you have your root DOM tree, and you have your virtual DOM, which is like split your root DOM into split small DOM. You can read about virtual DOM versus real DOM. So is a virtual DOM, is object has the same property as real DOM, but it leaked real thing power direction, something like this. So you can read about it. We may run through some of the example of virtual DOM, maybe if you give us some feedback on the comment box. So that's it. I think we can move ahead with component and props. Before that, let's see if we need to explain anything. Okay, so this thing, React elements are immutable. Once the create element, you cannot change its children or attribute. So something like this, right? So once we create a element xyz, um, it will be always a single frame. It will not change anything. The value itself only gonna change. So something like this it explaining, and rest of the things are I think very simple. Let's go to component and props. Okay. So before we start components and props, we have two types of component. We have like functional component and we have class component. Functional component is something like we write as a function, and we class component is like we write as a class. Let's see some example and see what's the difference. Okay, so this is a functional component where we have a function called welcome and it is returning a HTML element. Okay, however, this is a class component. Class component has a always will have a render, but functional component might not have a render. Okay, and this one has a some class component has always has some of the feature of like hooks, like component did like some of the hooks. Let's see, we when you're gonna do the life cycle, we know some of the hooks which is handled in the functional component in different way on a state level. Other than that, I think that should be it. Let's create our two component on functional and class component and see how this is different. Okay, so let me remove this line of code and just use this one. So we can create a functional component. A functional component we can create like this. We can return from this as a div. Hi there, this is a functional component. Let's do class component. CCOMP. Okay. Doing something wrong. Okay, my bad. We can copy this line of code here. So this is a class component. How we gonna render this? We can so if you see, right, we have this functional component and class component. We have this as a component itself, and we are able to render this like normal HTML syntax, right? We usually write line. So we usually write something like this is in an HTML element. Similar to that, we can write our component itself something like this, which is quite easy to understand, I think, and quite helpful when it comes to development, right? So that's the thing. Okay, so now let's think about the props, right? We have this something called props. So what happened is, like, let's say we have some variable here we want to transfer from our root component, right? And how do we do that, right? There is multiple way to do that. We can pass as a props. There is other way also we can learn later. One, let's say it's a props, right? So we can pass something called user. Okay, user 1. Okay, here same thing we can do for here. user 2. Okay, now here in the props, if we log this, we're gonna see that the user will come. Same thing, you can just render this dot props dot user, something like this. Same thing, we can just write props. So why this is available, you can read about binding, even binding on the JavaScript side. So this is required because this, since is a class component, this will gonna always trigger to this class itself, something like that. You can read about it. Changes, let's say what's the update. This is the update we see, right? So this is a functional component, this is the class component. It seems that our name is not available. Let's see the log. Log is available on user, right? Okay, so I think props dot user dot name. Okay, user 1 is coming, so let's props dot user dot name. So second, user 2. So yep, so now we are able to pass the data on the props label from our parent component. I hope that would be useful in the future videos. So there are different way, right? If you see, we can pass a static value as well, name, something like this, and there is a comparison. It has been showing here, right? So once we have a functional component and we have another functional component, and calling one functional component from another functional component and rendering the whole thing from a root component. So you can see the details here also, you can read about it. And there is another thing like comment they have created, right? So in the props they have passed different value, right? The author name, and then some of the text value and the date, and they pass, and they can render the comment from different section, which is like avatar. So yep, I think that's the update I wanted to give on today's video. Hope to see you on the next video on the state and life cycle. See you on the next video. Bye.